Welcome, everyone, to the Great Lakes Renewable Energy Seminar, 2023 Renewable Energy Seminar for November. This is our last one of the year, so we're going out with a bang today, or tonight, I guess. Tonight, we're going to hear an update on Ann Arbor's Sustainable Energy Utility Initiative that's moving along quite swimmingly. And please remember to mute, you guys, Lee. It's to be presented by Dr. Missy Stults, Director, Office of Sustainability and Innovation, City of Ann Arbor. I'm your host, Mark Clevey. I'm a lifetime GLREA member and a member of the GLREA board for another month. Oh. Remember to, you guys, you got to mute. Our financial sponsors for tonight are the Michigan Department of Environmental and Great Lakes and Energy, or EGLE, McNaught and McKay Solar Company in Ann Arbor, and Arbors Solar. Now, this is supposed to move now. Okay, I know this. There it goes. All right, there we go. Sponsored by GLREA, our seminars are part of a monthly solar stories program that was created and operated by John Sarver, our board member. Many of you know John, probably most of you. Renewable energy seminars cover topics of interest to renewable energy users, businesses, advocates, and stakeholders. And our seminars include content ranging from technology to business to public policy. It's a Zoom event held on the second Tuesday of every month from 7 to 8. Questions, comments, suggestions, insults, and otherwise can be directed to me, your host, Mark Clevey. My email is there. I also ask that you please remember to mute yourself. I will not be shy about reminding you. Please also hold all your questions until the end of the presentation. You can raise your hand under reactions to ask a question, and then I'll call on you. As the founder and host of GLR's the Renewable Energy Seminar Series, it's again my sincere pleasure to welcome Dr. Missy Stults, who is the Director of the Office of Sustainability and Innovation with the City of Ann Arbor. In December of this year, at our annual conference, GLREA will be honoring Missy with a McCoy-Koonman Award for Outstanding Women in Solar. Named after our first two women presidents, Melanie McCoy and Kendall Koonman, this award is given to women in Michigan who, through their outstanding leadership, accomplishments, contributions, and dedication to being the change they wish to see in the world, have significantly enhanced the role of women in the rapidly growing renewable energy in Michigan. The 2023 McCoy-Koonman Award is being presented to Missy at our meeting in December for her outstanding work to launch a new sustainable energy utility in Ann Arbor. Ann Arbor has now completed phase one of the ambitious plan to launch this new utility, a green utility or a green municipality that will be operating in parallel with DTE Energy. Phase one was a feasibility planning effort which published its findings in October of this year. Tonight, Missy will discuss the SEU process that's gone on to date, the SEU report findings from the October report, and recommendations, and of course, next step. With that said, welcome, Missy. The floor is now yours.
Mark, thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us on this glorious evening to talk about sustainable energy. What a treat, what a treat. I am really excited to be with you all tonight. So much so that I'm actually missing my daughter's science fair. So you all are that much more. Don't tell her. You're not more important than her. She's super important. But I'm so excited to be here that we could not skip that. So for tonight, what I want to do is kind of provide context, because for some of you, this concept of a sustainable energy utility might be new. I'm going to give you a little bit of what came out of a phase one study that was completed that included more than the SEU, but I want to talk a little bit about the results from the SEU. And then I'm just going to open it up for discussion, because I think that's where the richness of the conversation is going to be. So with that, any concerns before we go? You see the screen? I'm looking at you, Mark. Game on. All right. John and Mark, thank you for the space. Very sincerely, the work you do is critical, essential, and we lean into it heavily here in the city of Ann Arbor. So I want to start by just kind of bringing us here into Ann Arbor, where I am sitting right now. I happen to be occupying the traditional and the contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe people. This land was taken from them, formalized through the Treaty of Detroit in 1807. But that story is really important for understanding a lot of even what we're talking about today, this idea of conquering and extraction and conquest. There's a reason we're in a climate crisis, and those themes also tie with the themes of place and how we've taken place from people and how we continue to take places from people when we look at conflicts that are moving across the world today. But I want to bring us here to Ann Arbor and talk about our grounding. So you may know we have a goal in Ann Arbor of achieving a just transition to community-wide carbon neutrality by the year 2030. And if we're going to achieve that, we've got to understand where our emissions are coming from. So every year we do a greenhouse gas inventory. You can see the update. There's a video online. We report all of the findings, the data, so you can look at that and understand where our progress is coming from. So what we know here in Ann Arbor is that the majority of our emissions actually come from our built environment. Now, nationally, transportation is the largest source of emissions and a growing source of emissions, but we actually have really good walking and biking infrastructure. We have a lot of folks who take transit. And so it's our built environment that we need to be focusing on. Certainly, we're also working on mobility and transportation emissions, right? We got to work on everything that exists. But if we want to take a real big bite of the apple, we're thinking about our buildings. Building electricity and really natural gas usage is in the buildings, right? So those two figures alone, if we think about how to decarbonize our built environment, we are going to make a very significant impact in reaching our goals of a just transition. We also know that what I showed you before is historic profiles. We are doing a lot of things to help support electrification, whether that be vehicle electrification, putting in EV charging, electrifying our own fleet. I can't wait to welcome you to Ann Arbor to check out our electric refuse trucks. We have 4. They're not actually here yet, but we've ordered them. We've got electric street sweepers, bucket trucks. Our bike lanes have an electric sweeper. You know, we are investing in this infrastructure. We're working with the University of Michigan and Ann Arbor Public Schools to transition their buses. We're helping households figure out what does it look like to decarbonize. So we're pairing energy efficiency work, absolutely, and weatherization with beneficial electrification, with on-site DER and storage systems. And we're trying to figure out all of these things at once, right? And that includes how we help the end users understand what their next strategic opportunity is, how we lower barriers to access, how we do workforce development with the unions, to make sure that we have really good paying family sustaining jobs in the workforce we need to usher in this transition. And what we know is the work that we're doing, if it continues on par, is going to shift electric loads, right? I think we all sort of know this is the big conversation we're talking about here. So what's on this slide is a projection of what our loads could look like in the future. Now, I told you our goal is 2030. So if you look at 2024, we just projected out for next year, and 2030, they're pretty similar. What we know is the amount of investments we're making right now projected out mean that the energy efficiency work that we're doing pretty much offsets the electrification work that we're seeing come online. But as you go further out, we start to see a significant increase in the amount of electricity that we're going to need to support the decarbonization work. And of course, that's not clean unless we make it clean. And it's very exciting to be in this moment where technically the government, to the best of my knowledge, I don't think the governor has signed the bills, right, John? She signaled that she's going to.
The bills have to be enrolled by the clerk, get printed. There are a couple of procedural steps, but she's absolutely going to sign them soon.
Yep. So we're in this really interesting moment, right? Where what I'm showing you was done just a few weeks ago. We got our updated numbers, but even today, the world looks a little bit different in a very great way. So this information is already outdated, and I'll try to move it in real time with you all to reflect on what these bills mean for this work. But I bring this forward to say, we know that we've got a lot of work to do on the electric system. I'm going to talk about this in a minute, but for those of you who aren't familiar with Ann Arbor or don't live in more of a legacy city, one of the things you may not know is our electric grid is extremely unreliable. That presents a really big problem, right? If we're electrifying and yet we have an unreliable system and we have capacity challenges that we're dealing with. So we're sort of sitting with all of this. And then, of course, we're going to see a seasonal shift from summer peaks to winter peaks as we electrify, in particular, space heating. So we've got to kind of hold all of these different tensions as we're thinking about our goal of decarbonizing the built environment and the entire community as a whole. Now, this one is out of date because this was a projection of kind of a best case scenario 6 weeks ago. Assuming that everything sort of works out in 2030, that our My Green Power subscriptions continue, that our Solarize program is wildly successful and kind of stays on pace with what it's been, that we develop the landfill solar project, which I'm excited to say is moving again, which we invest in rooftop solar at city facilities. The best case scenario we thought was that we would have 41% an unmet need in terms of our renewable electricity. So we thought that we could kind of piece together commitments from Ann Arbor Public Schools. The University of Michigan is not in here, and that's because UM has agreed to a power purchase agreement. I think it might actually be a VPPA, but I got to see the vehicle, regardless, to offset 100% of their electric use, right? So we're just calling that flat for electric. So we thought by 2030, we'd have to figure out how we close that green wedge, that 41%. And so we evaluated a number of different pathways for how we could do that. Now, there's a report that's out. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, all the nuances of that report, but if people have questions, I'm happy to try and discuss them with you. The pathways that we evaluated were everything from stay the course, keep doing what you're doing and just invest in offsets, we'll say super not exciting, to municipalize, take over the infrastructure itself. I have feels about that, and we can talk about pros and cons of that pathway, to what we're going to talk about tonight, which is forming a sustainable energy utility. So let me transition to, you all probably know this intimately, but let's just level set. Here in Michigan, it's important to understand certainly the utility infrastructure, the utility organizational structure that your local government sits in. Here in Ann Arbor, we are in DT service territory, and we have what's known as a pre-Foot Act franchise. This means effectively, the courts have ruled repeatedly that our franchise is considered a perpetual franchise. So many places you'll hear stories, maybe in your community, or you hear stories in other communities outside of Michigan, where Minneapolis just negotiated a new franchise, and as part of that franchise, they're getting these climate investments, or San Diego is doing this franchise discussion, or Bellevue, Washington is doing X. Fabulous, because franchises are the right to serve. And nor after the Foot Act, franchises had to be negotiable, and they couldn't be over longer than a period of 30 years unless they could be revoked, unless it went to a vote of the people. So these are just sort of things that are in circulation, but not for Ann Arbor. I can't negotiate a franchise. The courts have indicated our franchise is in perpetuity. Okay, so first blow. However, the Foot Act, pre-Foot Act franchises are non-exclusive. And Michigan law is very clear that cities and villages, and I do want to pause, cities and villages, catch that word. That is not counties, that is not townships. The law is clear that cities and villages have the right to compete as well as take over their utilities, right? So what this means in practice, stay the course, that's the third bullet, just continue the relationship we have, buy out that incumbent utility and all of their infrastructure, that's a takeover, likely through eminent domain. And the third is compete effectively or form a stand-up parallel utility. And then there's probably something else, right? Because we're all creative human beings, so we'll just put other out there. The second point in here, the third one I spoke about, this creating a parallel utility, has, for the history of electrical, sans, I would say the last 5 to 7 years, never been practical. Why would you stand up poles and wires directly across the street from a utility to compete with them when you don't have 100% of the rate base? How are you going to afford that, right? How is that going to economically work when you have big centralized systems providing power? But with the advent and the economic viability of distributed energy resources, we questioned if the economics had changed. We started asking a whole bunch of what ifs. What if we could actually do a supplemental utility that focused solely on powering people's lives, their homes, their businesses, their streetlights, the infrastructure that we have with renewable energy, solar? And what if we tied battery storage into that? So effectively, we're doing nanogrids. And what if over time we grew that to be microgrids, where we had shared infrastructure? And what if that was a community-owned utility? And what if that meant we didn't have to buy the antiquated failing infrastructure that's outside our doors, but instead we invest in the utility of the future, the one that we want, that aligns with our goals and our objectives? And what if we did that in a way that actually gave residents a choice, where they could say, nope, I'm happy where I am, or yep, I want that? And would that actually be economically possible? And is it technically possible? And is it legal? So we asked these questions about 2 years ago, and we put together a task force of some national experts in different elements: energy law, community choice aggregation, because for those of you who follow CCA, this is kind of like CCA 3.0, where you do local aggregation of projects. We spun it a little bit for Michigan's context. And we brought together technical experts and we said, okay, what does this look like, right? And so we started with legal and we said, is this legal? And the answer is yes, this is legal. And we said, is it technically possible? And the answer is yes, it's technically possible. And then we got to the next point. Is it economical? And I'll show you more about that in a second. So what is this thing I'm talking about? This idea of an SEU, as constructed and kind of imagined in our headspace, was a community-owned energy utility that provides electricity, starting with electricity, from solar, locally installed solar, starting on rooftops or carports, and energy storage systems installed in homes and businesses throughout the city. You already do this, right? This is behind the meter systems that we see. We know we can do this. It's economical. There's an ROI in these investments. This works, right? Now, an energy storage system, it's a little tricky, but I will tell you, a lot of people in Ann Arbor are buying generators. And what's a battery if not a generator that provides all of these other benefits, right? So what if we just kind of flip the way we think about infrastructure? So that's kind of part one. But what if that utility also was able to invest, just like other utilities, in EWR? And what if it could actually support fuel switching and electrification support? And what if it did odd bill finance? And what if it actually prioritized serving frontline and underserved residents, the folks that are hardest to get to? And what if actually one of its core values was resilience and reliability? And this is what we started to say. If we're going to do this, we have to be really, really serious about centering the values we hold. Now, this is where I'm going to tell you something a little that's not on this slide that came out of research we recently did. When we were looking at the different pathways to meet our 100% renewable energy goal, that was a very technical analysis, right? And an economic analysis. But that's nice. If you don't understand what's socially possible, it doesn't matter. Right? It doesn't matter that technically and economically I can do A if the public is never going to come along with A, right? So in parallel with this study, we did a survey of the public. It was a statistically valid representative survey to understand what the community wants in their energy system. And I'm going to invite you all to type in the chat what you think the number one thing Ann Arborites want in their energy system. And I'm going to wait and I'm going to look if you guys do this. I see sustainability, reliability, resilience, reliability. Awesome. So the number one thing was resilience. As defined, we did not say resilience. We did not say reliability. We did test. We used the definition of those terms, and it's resilience. They want to be able to provide critical energy needs or meet their critical energy needs when there's a disaster or disruption. That's awesome. The second thing they want is clean energy. Then they want it to be reliable. They don't want to lose power, right? They want it to be affordable. They want it to be reliable. That's amazing, right? So what this tells me is resilience and the connection of energy storage is critical. So while what I'm showing you on the slide is what we thought as we were trying to design what a utility could look like. And what was just validated by our public is resilience, affordability, cost, and clean, right? That's what our reliability, or that's what our public is asking for in an energy system. That's really important information for me to hold, because if I stand something up, I need to know people will participate in it. All right, you guys are doing great. So moving forward, I sort of touched on this, but I want to name, as we envisioned a sustainable energy utility, absolutely bread and butter is solar and energy storage. Maybe like honey on bread and butter, which now you know my secret. I love honey on bread and butter. It's super delicious. That's the energy waste reduction initiatives that come into play. But an electric utility needs to provide electricity, right? That's the definition. So that has to be the first thing you think about. EWR comes into play, on-bill financing. And then this is sort of phase one. That's the stuff that we knew we could technically do pretty quickly. The second is microgridding. Of course, we know how to do microgrids, but here's the thing. I told you this was a supplemental utility. What that means is you actually have two feeds into the home. You have the SEU feeding solar and storage, right? And you've got DTE feeding. Some of you are like, great, I have that right now in my home, right? That's how this is operating. But what if the utility doesn't want to buy back any of that power? What if we produce so much they don't have to? What if the rates they offer it are shit? What are we going to do about that, right? So we actually thought about designing the system so that no energy goes back to the big G grid, that it actually stays in the SEU. So we wanted to prove financing in phase 2, or the financial viability, assuming we don't have to push energy back to the grid, that we actually can use it. And I'll show you use cases in an example of what I mean by that. I'll just tell you right now, I have solar, I have energy storage. My next door neighbors have beautiful oak trees. They're not viable for solar. But a lot of the time we overproduce at my house. Why aren't we sharing that system, right? That's what we're trying to really get to and maximize installations. We also think an SEU could potentially do district geothermal. So now instead of just doing air source heat pumps, what if heating comes from shared geothermal systems? What if I can deploy thermal energy networks and actually capture waste heat from homes and industrial processes and commercial processes? I can get to efficiencies in thermal energy networks of 800%. That's what we're seeing in campuses right now that have thermal energy networks. That is extraordinary, right? So this is certainly about electric, and that's where we started. But we've started to push it and say, but what if? But what if it can go further and bring us to the really wicked ideas of how to decarbonize heating in our community and how to do that in a safe way so no one ever has to breathe in toxic fumes in their home or their business. So I'm really excited about that prospect. So I mentioned this, I'm going to reiterate, an SEU is a local utility. It is community owned. It generates its power through community assets, right? So there are not assets outside the community, at least in the way we've envisioned it. It is immediate. You can, once it's created, you can start installing in your community, local installers, local jobs. The way we've designed it would help more Ann Arborites access clean energy and receive EWR services that are able under traditional marketplaces. And that's because you don't have to put an outlay of $18,000 or $20,000 down for a solar array. It's a shared asset. We would install it. You would pay per unit of energy just like you pay your bill today. That means more people have access to clean energy. And we thought that might actually be at the same rate that we currently pay for our electric or potentially cheaper. And I'll tell you what we learned about that in a minute. The thing that inspires me the most about this, I am really thankful for our electric system. I am thankful because it's helped so many of us get out of poverty. It's allowed incredible innovations to take place. But that system, to me, that we have at our windows is a system of the past. And I don't want to be saddled with the past, because the past also gave us rampant runaway climate change and growing socio and economic disparity. I want to think about what the future holds for our electric system. And the idea of an SEU is you're not saddling yourself with debt to own the past. You're focusing all of your investments in a future. And that excites me about an SEU. So we asked the question, what would be needed to make this work? This might be a little hard to see, and this is all available online, all of our data, all of our reports, everything we've learned. Mark Clevey, you go first. You raised your hand. Oh, it was a thumbs up.
I pushed the wrong button. Sorry. I was trying to clap.
Not at all. So the analysis that Mark alluded to that just came back was a study of how we could hit our 100% renewable energy goals. And I'm sharing with you tonight the results from the sustainable energy utility analysis. So the contractors, led by 5 Lakes Energy, developed a series of models for us. And what you see here is a table looking at different levels of subscriptions or subscribers, participants in the SEU. And here you can look at what's possible in terms of PV generation. You can look at what the rates might actually be, how we would finance that. Are we doing that through a direct city buy? Are we doing a PPA with a firm, even though those are city assets? What kind of debt do we take on? We have a very robust model that right now we are diving into and seeking calibration on. So I'm not going to be able to tell you exactly what's next for the city, but I'm happy to answer kind of questions about where we're thinking and what we're exploring in this real time. But what the model from 5 Lakes showed us, number one, an SAU is possible. Now, what is true is the energy generation, the solar installations, not a question. That not only is it possible, it's possible to do it cheaper than what rates are through DT. It gets complicated when you put a battery on that system. So how do you charge for a battery? Do you charge per kilowatt hour of discharge? Well, if you do that, it's probably not going to be cheaper, right? Just based on the economics of how you're using that system. Do you charge a monthly flat fee? Do you do bulk buys to buy down the cost? That's the question in the SEU model, is how do you value and price storage? And you can see this, right? Green Mountain Power is going through this in Vermont, kind of thinking about how they're pricing energy storage systems. We're all intervening in cases to try to think about how DTE and consumers value storage systems. But this is solvable, right? What a fun problem to think about. People buy generators all the time and they don't have ROIs. Okay, great. Let me just think about how to do this. So we've got work to do to kind of think in that space around energy storage. But if my residents are telling me the number one thing they want is resilience, well, storage is how we get there, right? And maybe utility scale storage comes into play and pencils, and storage is dropping pretty significantly in costs. So there's a lot of exciting opportunity there, but we do have to unpack that. We have to spend a lot more time thinking about the right model to deploy if we move forward with a sustainable energy utility. We also learned that how we finance an SEU matters a lot. Right? Are you taking out municipal bonds? Are we doing a PPA? Are we assuming, and also I said how we finance, but the timing of the finance matters too, right? What you don't want to do is take out enough debt to fund 12,000 subscribers and only have labor to install 1,000 in the first year. Then you've got to pay debt on the amount of money you've taken out. So you've got to be very thoughtful and sequential and making sure you have the labor to actually install so you can get the rates, pay back for the debt. So there's strategy, as you can tell. But the punchline is it pencils. That's exciting. So I'm just going to end here with a few quick examples. And these are just examples. So there's a million different ways you could slice this. So let's take kind of the most basic. One example is you have the SEU, Sustainable Energy Utility owned solar system. So in this case, the SEU installs solar on someone's roof. It's supplemental to DT. That individual pays per kilowatt hour generated from solar. They pay per kilowatt hour pulled from DT. They have 2 separate bills. One is lower, one is not. We support them with electrification because we've done this customized energy assessment. We're working on an energy concierge for those who do not know. So that will help us kind of like tie in to making sure people get the right services. And then over time, they may get a battery because that makes sense for them, or the SEU may need to install a battery and they can microgrid. But day one, exactly what we do today, right? Behind the meter system installed, they've got their 2 bills, game on, right? They just pay, they're using the same amount of energy, they can't tell the difference where it's coming from. Another option. Someone wants to subscribe to the SEU, but they're just not solar viable. So in this case, this is my neighbor, Peter and John. They may want to participate in the energy efficiency programs or electrification, or maybe they want that battery because they were going to get a generator anyway. And this way they can at least have some resilience in that system. So similarly, they would either have on-bill finance just through the SEU to pay for the efficiency improvements, or they may have a monthly fee or whatever that structure looks like for the energy storage system that they have. And they're on a wait list for when we determine it's possible to do microgrids. And they get enrolled in a microgrid when that becomes available, should that become available. So 2 bills, same thing, they just don't have solar. So they can still have resilience, but they can't have the generation. What if you already have solar and you want to participate in the system? Well, idea here. Maybe you still have energy efficiency work to do, or maybe you really want a battery. So you could also, just like the last individual, subscribe into that system. But also, maybe you don't have net metering because you're new to the game. Well, the SEU could potentially buy that power from you and give it to your neighbor, because I need that power for that microgrid that I'm trying to stand up. So once I get a concentration of enough people generating in a neighborhood, I can start to connect, right? But I'm not connecting through big poles and wires that are sitting outside my window right now. I'm connecting through minimal wires between homes. I can bury those wires because I'm not going into the right of way in the same way that I would if I was burying traditional infrastructure. So there's more opportunities to build the infrastructure and connect it strategically and surgically as you hit certain thresholds of concentration of generation, storage, interest, whatever the variable may be that we're looking to maximize. Renters can also play, right? This is great because renters, we can coordinate with landlords to do solar installations. We can also coordinate to do energy efficiency improvements, health improvements in those particular spaces. And when we get to something you'll see on the next slide, they can enroll in programs like community solar, because if we're a utility, we can do community solar, right? That's an opportunity that's open to us. We've been exploring green leases and how we can do on-bill finance, leveraging the green lease mechanism, or working with the Washtenaw Area Apartment Association to provide these improvements, and then actually telling people, hey, you want to live in Ann Arbor and you're a renter? We're prioritizing the organizations that have doubled down on sustainability commitments. And what if the University of Michigan does that with us? What if when students come here, they actually only hear about sustainable rentals? Wouldn't that be amazing, right? For us, 55% of our housing units, roughly, are rentals. So we've got to tackle this problem, but there's opportunities here. I mentioned community solar. Again, we're a utility, we can install community solar. We could do that at houses of worship. We could do ground mounts in parks. We can do carports in the parking lots that we have. We can do large installations on roofs. Maybe there's strategic areas where we have underutilized land that we can do even mobile assets. And then folks can actually subscribe and get the value of that asset in kind of more true community solar, as opposed to the way our utilities have told us community solar operates, which I don't think it's not really operates. So these are just some of the examples of how this could look. I'm gonna just close with this slide and leave it up for a minute. I will share all these slides with you all so you can kind of access these links. You can learn about that energy report I talked about. You can see our initial report. You can see webinars. We've got technical details, everything we've got about the SEU, about our energy options report. That 100% renewable report is called the energy options report. You can see all of the details that have emerged from those. You can also send me questions, but I just wanted to close by telling you where we are and what we're doing. So we've got these big models, and we've had these big models for about 3 weeks, and no one took away any of my workload when they gave me these big models. So to be fair, we have not had a lot of time to dive really, really deeply into the models, but we will be. And we've started looking at some of the variables. You can imagine we're having to unpack a lot of things like storage. How are we going to value storage? What are leading industry groups and utilities doing around the value of storage? How do we think about and price that? So we're starting to ask these kinds of questions because we need to fill those variables in to really push on viability, to understand if this is true. If my residents really want resilience, I've got to make sure I can price resilience right into that system, that I'm not expanding the have and the have not divide from those who can afford it and those who cannot. So we're working on that model. We've committed as staff to go to council early next year with a recommendation on next steps. And I am really excited about what is possible. I would lie to you if I told you I was not also overwhelmed by what is possible in this space. But this is exciting. And I think this is the moment where all of us are asking, what are we going to do differently? Because what we've been doing sure as hell isn't working. And so I'm excited to challenge that. And with that, I'm going to stop.
I did when I went out, but that was.
So let's go down to the reactions part at the bottom of your page, and you can click on that and you can raise your hand, and then I'll call on you and we can move forward. So we don't have anybody raising their hand yet. Oh, we do. Sandra Smith. Sandra, go ahead. Remember to unmute.
Okay. It seems like there the relationship, if you establish these microgrids between neighbors, is going to be a big part of it. I was trying to figure out, you know, right now or in the past, we actually ran a electric cord across to our neighbors one time and kept their freezer full of steaks. They gave us a couple afterwards. Stuff like that. It seems
There you
like
go.
there's going to be a lot more, you know, asking neighbors to
Yeah.
share. Have you thought about that? Do you
I'll
have?
be sharing with a meter on it. Your cord will have a little meter on it.
Yeah, yes, you'll actually be able to pay equally into that. Yeah, so we talk about that as phase 2, but we've thought a lot about that. The reason we think about it as phase 2 is traditional microgrids are able to push power to the grid, right? And we're not confident that we can do that based on lots of reasons that I'm not going to talk about right now.
Okay.
Because some of them are more practical. Nope, they're not practical. They're annoying policy stances. So we're going to challenge them. But so the reason this is a phase 2 for us is we want to figure out how to design the microgrids so that we maximize actual usage of power, that we don't have periods of high excess generation that then has to get grounded if we can't push it to the grid. So microgrids are really important, but it does mean we have to have different power dynamic systems. I saw Chuck Huckham at one point. Chuck is one of our advisors thinking about what does this look like? We've been working with the National Renewable Energy Lab because there's a lot of very interesting questions here. We put in really big federal grants because if we can figure out how to do this and kind of handle power load and maintain it, this is transformational work that we're talking about. So to your question, Sandra, it's if we are able to do a traditional microgrid, it's still complicated, but totally fine. If we can't push power back to the grid, well, we have a different challenge we need to solve for. So that's part of the reason it's not phase 1.
So if some of you who came last month, Chuck gave a presentation on community level storage. And so to answer one of Missy's questions, if you can't push if a microgrid can't push it to the utility for any number of reasons, then community storage makes a lot of sense. And once you get in the storage, then you can move it around. So you could move, you know, if you had a centralized storage, a microgrid could dump extra excess power into that storage, and that storage could then be deployed to the other people in Ann Arbor, the renters, et cetera. It's deployable then. So if the utilities they don't want to buy Ann Arbor's green power, okay.
Yeah, storage is important. Well, and the other thing I want to name is one of our vulnerabilities is overhead lines. Right. Yeah. So part of this is you do very small scale, you know, like think 20 homes, maybe 50 homes, depending on the geographical distribution, so that a storm, you don't have big poles and wires. A storm is not taking out power in the same way that a storm takes out huge swaths of the city. You know, if we lose a line in a neighborhood, we lose 50 homes. We don't lose 4,000 homes, right? So that's a much more surgical intervention as well. That's part of what we're thinking about.
Dave Curtis, member unmute, you're up.
Thank you very much. I want to say Sandra had a great question there, and her points were well taken as far as the minutia, if that's truly a word. But my question is, does the Ann Arbor fathers, in quotation marks, get along good with your ideas and all of those community solar kind of equations that fit together?
Dave, I might have misunderstood. Did you say fathers in quotation marks? And if you did,
sorry. I'm sorry. The Ann Arbor political landscape.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I needed to clarify. Great.
Oh, there you go. Yep.
Thank you. Yes. I mean, I think there's always differences of opinion, but we work really, really closely with our elected leaders, with our public, and we also have data, right? Like we have lots and lots of data to sit down and say, you may disagree with the pathway, but I'm going to at least justify it through a data-driven process about how we got to where we got. You also have set this North Star of 100% renewable energy powering our system. We've got to find a pathway to do that. Right. And assuming that every single household on their own is going to invest in DER, that's just not realistic. Right. Like I cannot scale that at the pace that we are talking about here. And so we've been able to have really constructive conversations with our electeds. I don't think I can speak for them and say this is a slam dunk. I can say we talk about this a lot.
Can I make another point?
Do it.
Do you reach out statewide with these ideas? I'll call them ideas, but I'm all in. Don't get me wrong.
So you can call, no, of course. Yes, absolutely. We've also briefed the Public Service Commission. When we came up with the idea of the SCU, we had a special meeting with them to think about what this could mean. We continue to brief them on the process. We've met with the folks in the governor's office, of course, with Eagle, the climate office. We'll meet with anyone to talk about these various initiatives and how we can move them forward. Because if we all know this, if Ann Arbor figures this out and no one else can do it, we didn't succeed.
Okay. Andre, you're next. Unmute.
Hello. So as we talk about resilience, I know that most of this was focused on solar. I wanted to bring up, like when you talked about just another solution that's always on my mind. When we're getting too much power or you're making too much electricity and it's above the batteries, have you ever considered making hydrogen? It can be stored, it can be sold, it can be, we have similar pipeline, infrastructure for it, and it's another route that we're going. And it's just a suggestion from my side. I know it makes the equations a lot harder, but hydrogen can be used for heating. I mean, it's not easy to store. It's not the easiest thing, but it's a possibility. And
Yeah.
I just wanted you to think about that. And it's a form of clean energy. When it burns clean. So that was
Thanks,
my
Andre.
2 cents.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I would say sort of. One, don't take anything I said as gospel truth, right? We're always learning and evolving our models because everything around us is constantly changing. Last week, I had a call with one of the members of the Michigan Hydrogen Hub because Michigan did win, I'm sure you know, right, the funding for a hydrogen hub. And we were talking about how we could leverage solar and storage as part of hydrogen is not clean. Green hydrogen, right? Like we need to get to green hydrogen. So how do we get to green hydrogen? And so, yes, we're in those conversations. None of us have cracked the economic code yet, but we are certainly open to exploring all the tools. So thank you for raising it.
Good point, Andre. Kate, you're up.
All right, thank you. That was a great presentation. When you're talking, someone mentioned energy going back to the grid versus community storage. Am I understanding that you prefer community storage? That's the better way to go?
Hey, thank you for that question. Only because I'm trying to define better in my head. Let me say it from this perspective. It is not clear how easy it would be to put it back on the grid. And so we will fight that fight, and we want to be able to still move forward while that fight is being fought. So storage will have to play a role unless the stars align and this just instantly goes back to the grid. And even if it does, we still need storage anyway for outages, for the resilience elements of the work. So the reason we designed it and we thought about it the way we did is it's way more complicated. And if it can pencil being way more complicated, then it works when it's easy, right? So we went to the extreme version as opposed to the opposite of saying, if everything works out, is it viable? Well, we kind of already know the answer. Yeah, of course it is, because there's ROI on systems today, right? Like that's not the problem. The question was, if we can't do the thing that we all think we should, which is being able to push it to the grid when we have excess generation, especially after battery storage, and get value for that, then can you still make it work? And the answer was yes. And that's where we knew now it's worth continuing investing in, because even in a really tricky situation, it can still work.
Okay.
I'm sorry that wasn't the best. Like I couldn't answer the best because the way we didn't think about it that way. We thought about the hardest.
Yes, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, great.
Missy, this is John. Are there any legal barriers to moving this, and or is DTE going to try and stop it? And because I would think they would view this as they don't like competition.
Yeah.
John, yeah, well, let me preface, I am not a lawyer. For those who know me, I am a social scientist. So I can't answer, is there any legal challenge, right? What I can say is our analysis has shown this is legal, what we are proposing to do. If you gave me a crystal ball, do I think that I see a lawsuit in our future? Yes. Do I think we're going to win it? Yes, because we have very clear indication that something like this would be legal. Does that mean there's not a technicality somewhere that I haven't seen? No, because no one has formed a supplemental utility in Michigan. It just has not been economically possible. Okay. All right, let's go, John. Come join me. Let's get a beer. Let's figure out how we're going to do this. Come on. I need you in my court.
I love it.
Sounds great.
Michael.
All right,
Michael, you're up.
yeah, thanks. And thanks so much for the presentation. It looks fascinating, and I'm really looking forward to digging into the reports and everything else with the links that you had here. But tons of questions. The one I want to focus on right now is when you're looking at solar production, right? Because most of this energy is coming from solar between winter and summer, and you have, maybe a 5 to 6x difference between those. How are you thinking about sizing the systems between those two seasons, and what do you do with either the massive excess energy in the summer or the lack of energy in the winter?
Thank you. So this is one of the elements that we actually built into the model that Five Lakes built in to help us understand how best to size the system to handle seasonal shifts. I have not had a chance to really dive in and play with those variables enough to understand the maximization of system design to handle that wide fluctuation. But it is a variable that's in the model to help us figure out how best to price and how best to size. Let me also name, this is not the point of today's conversation, but I am super excited that Ann Arbor a few months ago won a US DOE community geothermal grant. So we are working in a neighborhood to design a network geothermal system for 262 households, a school, a community mental health facility, our public works facility. Now I start to see how I'm balancing load. Right? Like now I've got thermal, I've got solar, I can see more shifting, I can see more tools in the toolbox, I can see how storage plays a different kind of role. So we're in, it's just a design for geothermal, but we're also already doing solar in the neighborhood. So I have a real world experiment that I can do to figure out how these things actually stack and finance or don't pencil out. So that's not a direct answer. The model will help me understand if we just do solar, but that would be really boring. So I'm going to add geothermal into it too.
Right. Jay, you're up. Thank you. Unmute, Jay. There you go.
Yeah, got it. Hello, Missy. Jay Nugent, Ypsilanti. I run a hybrid home. Most of it runs off 12 volts DC. Store my own power and my batteries off of a bank of solar panels, and also have a grid tied but no export grid tied system. What I wanted to ask you about is, are you working with Emerge Alliance? They're out of Arlington, Virginia. They've been deploying microgrids all across the country. And this summer, they set up a demonstration microgrid on the BC National Mall and had that up and running on display for all the Congress critters to see. But their objective is these community or neighborhood microgrids where they have their own, wind turbine or solar farm, or all the homes that generate solar send their excess energy into the community battery. And in the event of a grid failure, of course, these entire neighborhoods just continue to run. Case in point, there was one in Florida that they deployed a couple of years back. And when a hurricane came through and wiped out the power grid for miles around, this one little subdivision stayed online and everything kept going. But the company or the organization, it's a nonprofit, is called Emerge Alliance. Are you familiar with or working with them?
Well, I am now, because they're up on the screen that you can't see. So I will become familiar with them in a minute. Thank you for the recommendation. No, I wasn't, Jay, but we'll invest.
Yeah,
Thank you, Jay. That's good. Could you, Jay, could you put the link to them in the chat, please?
I've got it right here. I'll drop it.
You guys, okay, great. All right, Mary, you're unmute. You're on.
Hi, thanks. I apologize if I'm echoey. I'm at my son's cross country practice in a large dome.
And Mary's on the geothermal grant, you guys.
I am. Well, Washtenaw County is. But I'm actually here in a different capacity. So I do some work with an organization that works mostly in Hamtramck, Highland Park, and North End, Detroit. And I'm hearing you that this is economically feasible in Ann Arbor. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on whether or not it might be economically feasible in places like that are very different from
the answer is yes,
Ann Arbors of the world.
Yeah, no, it's anyone that's in DT service territory, the economics work, because it's what the rate of electricity is when you install the system, right? So we actually, I'm going to guess it's Solidarity. We might have had many.
It's not. You guessed wrong.
Okay. I was gonna say, we've had many conversations with them about it, and acknowledging that it takes a lot of work to go first. So we talked to many municipalities about the risk appetite that Ann Arbor has to potentially go first, but to do it in a way that others could engage. Now, here's one thing I want to name. Sometimes people will ask me, why don't you just do it for the whole county? Well, you can't. You have to do your franchise footprint. That's really, really important here. But that doesn't mean you couldn't have shared billing or shared field crews, right? There are things that you could lean into together, but it has to mirror the franchise footprint.
Right. Great. Thank you, Mary.
Thanks.
Jason, we got about time for a couple more questions, so I'm going to move fast here. Jason, you're up.
Yep. Good evening. Just real quick. So one of the struggles that Ann Arbor has is distribution of medium voltage. So the high voltage distribution is really well. The low voltage in communities is good, but the medium voltage interconnects between is very poor and outdated. In the community solar or community battery setups you guys have looked at, have you looked at larger scale utility scale battery systems connected to medium voltage nodes that would power, say, 1,000 homes based on that node that has good downstream distribution, and then do a pass-through purchase of DTE power where you're passing through normal electricity, but in an outage situation, you're providing the ability to discharge batteries into that node.
Jason, we haven't yet in the detail that you're like in the scenario that you just outlined. And thank you for raising it. Where we are is we're about to install our first utility scale batteries for city facilities, largely for peak shaving purchases at our plants, and a little bit of solar installation there. So I would say, are not as sophisticated yet with utility scale batteries. We're getting into that space. So point well taken, and would love to learn more and kind of hear your idea in greater detail.
Yeah,
Great.
Just a quick follow-up on that. Actually, Ann Arbor is home to two great large engineering firms that work in the power generation and power distribution space. If you do get to that scale, they often look at these types of systems and all over the country.
Super.
Yeah, love that, Jason. Yeah, I would love to connect. Please send me a note. I'll drop my email in the chat.
Ben, you're up. Ben Brown, unmute. Ben? Ben Brown, you want to ask your question? You got your hand up.
Mute. There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So real district heating, district thermal heating, and geothermal. I'm wondering what the difference is. And again, in the summer, you have all that excess thermal energy or PV energy, but thermal energy as well. We have a person in Delton who built a home that was storing thermal energy on like a 4 or 5 month scale. And I just think on a larger system like university size, what's the difference between that and geothermal?
Okay, let me see if I can unpack your question. Great question, and I will drop some resources in. The way that I have been thinking about them or using them as part of this conversation, geothermal, you could have a shared geothermal loop, which is super efficient still, right? Where you have multiple houses connected, and that is awesome. Great levels of efficiency. And you can add heat capture from things like industrial processes, or just like in a boiler room, you also are producing all of this extra heat that you can capture and even put back into that system. Now you're talking about a more efficient network. So you've got geothermal as well as this additional layer. So we've been thinking about geothermal to start in neighborhoods, but in like our downtown, I've been thinking about more thermal capture. So geothermal paired with some industrial heat capture, if that's helpful.
Yes.
I'm going to get in front of my skis in a minute because I am not an electrical engineer or a thermal designer of systems.
You haven't stepped in it not yet. Yeah, you're doing great, Missy. Lee Andrew, you got a call? You got a question?
It's
Hands
a
up.
short.
Oh, I lost you, Lee.
She mentioned a battery that they're sizing or considering putting in. Could you mention how big it is in megawatt hours?
Yeah, it's just under a megawatt that we're doing at our water treatment.
We only got part of
plant.
that, Lee. You're breaking up.
I heard Lee talk about the battery and the size of the battery. Is that right, Lee?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So I think it's a 500 kW battery that we're installing, but I can double check that number. That's what's in memory, but it was a while ago that it was authorized. Council's approved it. It's very, very public, but largely for peak shaving purposes, since our water treatment plants rates are, I mean, we need anything we can do on peak shaving has a huge impact.
Yeah, I recently attended a ribbon cutting for a peak shaving plant at the sewage plant in Bowling Green, Ohio.
Nice.
And that was 12 megawatt hours.
We have work to do, okay? You know what, Lee? I just hear an opportunity to be better.
Okay. Thank you for your work.
Yeah,
So I want to thank Missy for doing this. Missy, it was great, and we're going to call you back next year and an update because you got a lot of moving parts here. So we expect to see things. I look forward to when it finally starts to get implemented and we can open some bottles of champagne and really celebrate this. So you've done a stunningly wonderful job pulling this together and making it happen. So we are happy to be able to honor you this year, and very pleased that you're sharing your very valuable time with us. With that, I'm going to, John Freeman, I'm going to give this to you to close out to make a pitch for our annual meeting.
Well, I just want to pitch membership as well. I mean, if anyone who's on this is not a member of GLREA, we really encourage you to become members. Just go to the website. At the top, you'll see membership. Click on the tab and scroll down and follow the directions. It's really straightforward. And then we're having our annual year-end year begin meeting on Saturday, December 2nd. It will be our first. We're doing a hybrid version in person at the Weber's Hotel and Restaurant in Western Ann Arbor. And then we're going to be having, of course, the Zoom streaming as well. So tickets are $35. It's an opportunity to celebrate the amazing work we all did this year and begin planning for next year. So I would encourage all of you to join us, and it's a fun event. So thank you so much, Missy, for joining us. You're doing incredible work.
Thank you.
I told the students last night that if Ann Arbor is successful in making this work, then there are a whole lot of other cities that could be adopting this model as well.
Yes.
As you
John, I
said
think you
earlier,
said
it's
when Ann Arbor?
transformational. So
You said when Ann Arbor is successful, not if, right? You said when?
When?
exactly.
Yes, when.
Exactly.
Just checking.
You're right. You got it right. So thank you, everybody, for joining us, and stay tuned for future announcements for next sessions. Have a nice evening.